Okay, welcome back to American Stories in Music. And today we're going to start off with the French and Indian War, a war which started in Europe and was brought here to the Americas. So there is a famous painting. It's called The Death of General Wolfe. And while many know the painting titled The Death of General Wolfe, few have heard the song that describes the same event. Major General James Wolfe was one of the most prestigious officers of the British Army in the early 1700s. By the age of 18, he was a brigadier major, and by 23, a lieutenant colonel. When the 7 Years' War broke out, Wolfe saw an opportunity to advance in rank and became crucial to the British Empire's success. After a long campaign to capture Quebec City from French control, Wolfe was successful in defeating the French battery led by Lieutenant General Louis Joseph de Montcalm. However, both generals suffered mortal wounds and passed after the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Quickly after the city was captured, word spread of General Wolfe's valiant capture of Quebec City, and he became a Canadian and British icon, often referred to as the hero of Quebec and the conqueror of Canada. The origins of the song, The Death of General Wolfe, are unknown, but it has been recorded after being sung across Great Britain and the North American colonies after the British victory in Quebec. Yet no official composer has been identified. Because of a lack of an official version, there are many variants to the song, which have evolved over time and remain part of living music culture today. Newer versions have been produced in the past 20 years. Over its evolution, the song variants have had many different titles, such as Brave Wolf, Brave General Wolfe, Bold Wolf. While there are many differences in lyrics and titles, the message is the same. The song recounts the story of the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, emphasizing how brave General Wolfe, leading his army against the French, sacrificing himself for the greater good of the British, and dying happily knowing his army prevailed. Much like the painting of a similar name, the songs revere Wolfe with a Christ-like resemblance and depict him as a saint. So we're going to listen to a version of the song, really in the style of the time. It's sort of a folk ballad, I guess you'd call it. But just a quick sidebar story. So one of the ancient grandfathers was in the colonies here in Massachusetts, a farmer. A bunch of kids. It's like 27 years old. Gets called up by he's British. A British colonist here in Massachusetts, Bay Colony, and he gets called up to go serve in the army, which he does. He goes, and he gets killed. And he's got a family of a bunch of kids, young kids, wife, farm here in Massachusetts. Back then, if you died in battle, there was no backup plan. There was no compensation from the government because you died in battle. And, those families had to make do with what they had, and it made things a tough go all the way around. So, shortly thereafter, along comes the American Revolution, and those kids that grew up without a father, after, being killed in the war, there was a difficult time for them to make a decision what to do. So, it's a quick story of how things were back then. And if you died in battle, there was no money coming in from the government because you sacrificed your life to go to war. Okay, so let's listen to the song called Brave Wolf, and you can find the link in the description box below. Okay, so we want to talk about our next song. It's called the Liberty Song, and it's a pre-American Revolutionary War song with lyrics by founding father John Dickinson. The song is set to the tunes of Heart of Oak, the anthem of the Royal Navy of the United Kingdom. So here again, America really doesn't have its own music yet. They're still taking British songs and maybe changing the lyrics, but they really haven't created their own genre of music yet. Nevertheless, in 1768, Pennsylvanian John Dickinson wrote America's first patriotic song, the Liberty Song, and was written about a year after British Parliament imposed a series of small taxes on consumer goods like glass, paper, paint, and tea. By this point, many Americans had grown tired of the steady stream of British measures designed to extract some tax revenue from them. The Liberty Song called on the British colonists of North America to join hand in hand to resist these and earlier treasonous acts. After all, the song reminded them, in freedom we're born. In fact, many of their forefathers had traveled through oceans to deserts to ensure that they remained free. Well, oceans at least. Consequently, they owed it to their children to pass on the same legacy. Even though resistance carried risks, our children shall be gathered the fruits of our pain. So, what is the purpose of all these taxes that England is suddenly pushing upon the American colonists? Well, it goes right back to our French and Indian War, 10, 15 years earlier. War is an expensive undertaking. England had lost a lot of money during that war, and so did the French too. But nevertheless, England thought that the way to recoup some of their financial losses would be to tax the American colonies, which didn't work out very well. Okay, so let's take a listen to the Liberty Song, which we can find the link in the description box below. Okay, next we want to talk about Thomas Jefferson. He was the third United States president. He was the second United States vice president, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, philosopher, statesman, scholar, attorney, planter, architect, violinist, writer, and natural scientist. He wished to be remembered as the author of the Declaration of Independence, and of the Virginia State Statute for Religious Freedom, as well as the founder of the University of Virginia. He was born in a moderately well-off planter family. Jefferson's father, Peter, taught him the love of both nature and books. His mother, Jane, was a descendant of the noted Randolph family of Virginia. After his father's sudden death in 1757 left him completely on his own, he entered the College of William and Mary and applied himself to his studies while beginning the collection of his eventually massive library. He had a table book holder that he invented, and he would often read 4 books at a time. While at college, he met and frequently dined with 3 men who taught him enlightened philosophy and altered the course of his thought and life. Governor Francis Farquhar, attorney and scholar George Wyeth, and Professor William Small. Jefferson's religion, like much else, was private, and his views known only to him. A lifelong Anglican, Church of England, he was not an atheist and was probably a deist or a Unitarian. Other deist founding fathers were Washington, Franklin, Madison, and Monroe. Deists believe in a supreme being who created the universe to operate solely by natural laws, and after creation is absent from the world. His first term as president was filled with triumphs, including the Louisiana Purchase and the starting of the Lewis and Clark expedition. His second term mostly saw trouble. After finishing his second term, he retires to his home called Monticello, and he renewed his friendship and correspondence with John Adams with letters continuing to provide a treasure trove for students of both men. After paying his father-in-law's debts, Jefferson was essentially impoverished to his last 50 years, spending too much on Monticello, lavish entertainment, food, wine, and mostly books. In 1814, he negotiated the sale of his 6,000 plus volume library for $24,000 to replace the Library of Congress, which had been burned by the British in 1814 during the War of 1812, though stating, "I cannot live without books." He was to acquire approximately another 1,000 prior to his death. In 1819, Jefferson saw his final dream realized when the legislature approved the University of Virginia. He designed the buildings, hired the professors, saw the first students admitted in 1825, and even invited them 2 at a time to his home for dinner. A young Edgar Allan Poe received suggestions for future reading. So let's talk a little bit about Jefferson the violinist. This is from lewisandclark.org by Joseph A. Musselman. As part of his early education, a gentleman's education, Thomas Jefferson learned to read music and play the violin. And by age 14, he was capable of writing down his favorite fiddle tunes. Many years later, he recalled that as a young man, he regularly practiced 3 hours a day. Unfortunately, he fractured his wrist in 1786, and his playing was severely curtailed after that. The large library of music he eventually collected contained works by old masters such as Vivaldi, Corelli, and Handel, plus works by contemporary composers such as Joseph Haydn. In addition, there were books of popular songs and a few volumes of psalms, hymns, and anthems. During his lifetime, he owned several violins, the finest of which may have been an Amati made in Italy in the 17th century. Also, there were harpsichords, pianos, guitars in his household, but they were primarily ladies' instruments. While he was in Paris during 1780, Jefferson purchased a bow by Francis Torti, which represented a significant change in the mechanics of bow design. Jefferson's younger brother, Randolph, who as a youth also studied the violin, was more inclined toward the vernacular idiom. According to Isaac, a family slave, Randolph, quote, used to come out among the black people and play the fiddle and dance half the night, unquote. So we're going to take a look at a short video about the violins of the day of Thomas Jefferson. Now, if you notice, there was no neck holder on these violins, which sort of limited the play of the violin and how far down on the violin to play different notes they could actually go. So by adding the neck piece, it increased the range of the performers of what notes they could play. So let's take a look at Jefferson's violin. You can find it in the description box below. Okay, so next we want to talk about Appalachia. So you can see from the map where it is. And this is from the Blue Ridge Mountain Travel Guide. The wilderness of Appalachia became a frontier for exploration and living. Daniel Boone, whose 1775 expedition through Virginia's Cumberland Gap into Kentucky established the route for settlers moving west. He became the first folk hero of America's pioneer era. And American Commonwealth was still pre-Revolutionary War. Began immigrating to America in great numbers. So this pushes the original 13 colonies are getting sort of overloaded, and people are starting to move west, which runs them right into Appalachia. Although it started in the states of North Carolina and Virginia, the culture spread quickly to other states after the Revolutionary War, as settlers began to explore outside the original 13 colonies. The culture of Appalachia consists of art, crafts, food, myths, and folklore, and multiple ethnic influences, including African, German, Native American, Scots, Irish, and English. Eventually, disagreements grew between the wealthy elites living in the lowlands and along the coast, and the more rural people of Appalachian backcountry. Traditional Appalachian music is derived primarily from the English and Scottish ballad tradition and Irish and Scottish fiddle music. African American blues musicians played a significant role in developing the instrumental aspects of Appalachian music, most notably with the introduction of the five-string banjo, one of the region's iconic symbols. The sounds of Appalachian music can be heard in a wide range of genres, including ballad, singing, bluegrass, blues, early country music, gospel, mountain swing, and old time. So there's a dance called clogging, which is closely associated with the music. And it is an expressive style of American dance with origins in the folk dances of the British Isles, Africa, and pre-Columbian America. Settlers in the American South took elements of these styles to form a unique American dance style, Appalachian clog dancing. So American fiddle music today, we have a song called Fire on the Mountain. It's a bluegrass genre from the 1930s. And you get to hear an explanation of the song and a demonstration of both fiddle playing and clog dancing. And you can find that in the description box below. Okay, so one of the main industries in Appalachia is coal mining. And it began just about this time here in the mid-1700s to supply commercial and residential users. Large-scale timber harvesting and coal mining stimulated railroad expansion in the mid-1800s, which improved transportation linkages to more populated areas and further increased coal demand. The American nation's industrial development increased usage of iron and steel, further expanding coal demands. Coal was essential to American electrification during the 20th century, with numerous and thick coal seams accessible by both surface and underground mines. Appalachia was the U.S.'s primary coal-producing region from the 1800s through the 1970s. Appalachian coal mining has influenced the region's landscape, forest, water, and people over the more than 2 centuries. Okay, so there's a song called Coal Mining Man. It's sort of a bluegrass piece sung by the Roys. And it describes the miner's routine in a way that emphasizes his strong, enduring spirit. It then reveals his motivating force to be his love of his wife and his determination to provide for her. The song treats its character in a manner that is neither condescending nor idolizing. It mainly aims to build appreciation for the qualities he displays. He works hard, but you never hear him complain about his adversities. Whenever his boss yells at him, he simply takes out his frustration with a stick of good old dynamite. Besides the lyrics, the rich roots originated bluegrass instrumentation is another major feature of the song. So in the description box below, take a listen to Coal Mining Man, one of the major industries of Appalachia. Okay, so next slide, we're going to talk about a famous, what became an American song called Yankee Doodle. And Yankee Doodle is a well-known American song and a nursery rhyme, the early versions of which predate the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian Wars, and the American Revolution. It is often sung patriotically in the United States today and is the state anthem of Connecticut. The melody is thought to be much older than both the lyrics and the subject, going back to folk songs of medieval Europe. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the first verse of the song. And the first verse goes like this: Yankee Doodle went to town, a-riding on a pony. He stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Now, this is not the pasta dish macaroni. And from an article, the macaroni in Yankee Doodle is not what you think. Meet the stylish gender role rebels of 1770s England by Michael Waters, August 2016. In England, the word macaroni took on a larger significance. To be macaroni was to be sophisticated, upper class, and worldly. In Yankee Doodle, then, the British were mocking what they perceived as the Americans' lack of class. The first verse is satirical because a doodle, a simpleton, thinks that he can be a macaroni, fashionable, simply by sticking a feather in his cap. In other words, he is out of touch with high society. But what is fascinating about those fashionable British macaronis is how quickly they fell out of favor, and how within a decade, a word that once denoted worldliness became synonymous with excess and male femininity. From Yankee Doodle, the story behind the song from the KennedyCenter.org. Lexington and Concord was the British were leaving Boston, marching out to Lexington and Concord. They were looking for munitions and rifle stashes along the way. They heard we're out in Lexington and Concord area. So as they're marching out from Boston to Lexington and Concord, they are playing the song Yankee Doodle. Reports say that British fifers and drummers teased the colonists by playing Yankee Doodle as their columns snaked along rural roads. In the small town of Lexington, the British soldiers confronted a line of Minutemen on the village green. A gun went off, British muskets opened fire, and in an instant, 8 Americans were dead or dying. British forces then continued on toward Concord and destroyed what weapons they found. Now, the British Army had to march back to the safety of Boston. Colonial Minutemen swarmed to the attack, taking up positions along the route. They hid behind trees and rock walls, picking off soldiers after soldier. Some British troops broke ranks and ran. Others, angered by American tactics, broke into houses and set them on fire. Eventually, more British troops arrived from Boston to rescue the survivors. Legend has it the Colonial militiamen returned the musical insult as they counterattacked. They sang Yankee Doodle as British soldiers retreated. It was as if the Americans were singing, "How do you like us, Yankee Doodles and dandies now?" The American Revolution had begun. Yankee Doodle soon took hold as an unofficial anthem for what became the American Continental Army. So let's take a listen to the song Yankee Doodle, which you can find in the description box below. Is the Old Oaken Bucket by Samuel Woodworth, and he was born in 1782 and passed away in 1842. So he writes this poem in 1817, and it became a popular song about 17 years later in 1834. So Samuel wrote poems and novels and plays and operas, and he was a newspaper reporter, but he was born right here in this little small town to a farming family, bunch of kids. And his prospects for the future were very limited. Basically, if you were born into a farming family, you became a farmer as well. And as we look at farms and farming in Yankeedom and across the country, not much had really changed since the Revolutionary War. Life was pretty much the same as it was back in 1776. So we have a whole 100 years of not much going on, not much change. Now, Woodworth, again, grew up as a kid on a farm, and the local minister kind of took him in and took him beyond the usual one-room, schoolroom education of the day, and taught him about writing and introduced him to poetry. And eventually that minister gathered up enough money for him and sent him off to college. Uh, Along the way, he learns the printing trade. He becomes a printer. And he goes down to New York City, where all the big jobs are for printing. And he has a hard day at work. Him and his mates go down to the local pub after a hard day, and they are going to have a couple glasses of wine. So he orders a cognac, which is a very special, high-priced wine, and he drinks it down, and he says, "Oh, there's nothing better than a nice glass of cognac." And his workmate says, "Yeah, there is. There is something better." He says, "I remember when I worked on the farm after a hard, hot day in the summer, coming back up to the well, getting a nice, cool glass of sparkling water. And nothing tasted better than that on earth." And Woodworth thinks about that for a while, and he goes back to his home, and he writes this poem in about a half an hour. And this poem becomes a standard that's even taught in American schools today. It becomes a song. There are a couple of YouTube videos on the song. It's a little hot on the ears from the music of that day, but if you want to take a listen, go ahead. Okay, so let's talk about the. Also, there is a trophy that's given has been given every year since 1925. It's called the Old Oaken Bucket Trophy. And it has something to do with the Big Ten Conference of college football, a special game between Purdue University and Indiana University, and whoever wins the game gets the Old Oaken Bucket Trophy. So a couple of the, again, so this is would be classified as a romantic writer. And romantic writers look back at the past and make it seem like this is the best time in history. So, a couple of the quick vocabulary from the poem you might not know. It talks about where the cataract fell. And a cataract is a waterfall. He also talks about nigh, which is an old English term that means near. And he talks about Jupiter. And Jupiter was a Roman god of thunder and lightning and storms and light and the sky. So again, this romanticized view of the past. Okay, so he he grew up in this small town. He's a farmer kid, and like I said before, and it looks back at an idealized view of the small family-owned farm in the early 1800s. So what I'm going to tell you now is what life was really like in 1800 on a farm. Okay, so first of all, there's no bathroom in the house. There's a house outside the house called an outhouse, and that's where you go do your duty. But at night, you might do it in a pot or a bucket. And every day, you're going to take it out and get rid of it. There's no grocery store. There's no Aldi. There's no Spar. There's no little neighborhood Coop. Okay. There's one grocery store possibly nearby. And you can buy flour, coffee, and sugar. And that's about it. And you buy it on credit, and you pay for it after the fall harvest. You dig your own well. You do your own blacksmithing, which is metal work. Put shoes on the horses. You do all of that. And you starve in the winter if you have a bad growing season. You would be expected to have 18 to 20 children during your marriage. Half of them will pass away by the age of 5 due to childhood diseases that we have vaccines and cures for today. You slaughter your own animals for meat. Chickens, pigs, cows, you do all of that yourself. Big day off, Sunday. Okay, everybody gets Sunday off, but you go to church and you're going to be there all day. Okay, church is an all-day affair back then. Let's talk about hygiene. Okay, basically it doesn't exist. There's usually a pan with water in it as you come in the house, and you wash your fingertips, maybe wash your face in the morning. And Saturday night bath is one bathtub filled with water shared by everyone. Good luck with that. Okay, so clothes. Okay, so you have 2 sets of clothes. You have your Sunday best clothes, and then you have one set of clothes just for everyday farming. And those clothes are repaired and re-repaired and repaired and repaired until they fall off you, and then they make you a new set of clothes. let's see, before the Civil War, there were no left and right shoes. They were the same for both feet. And it was your feet that stretched out the shoe to make it a right shoe or a left shoe. Good luck with that one. Alcohol abuse was rampant, worse than today. You do go to school. It's a one-room schoolhouse. Uh, the teacher teaches all grades in one classroom. And your teacher is usually a single woman, and she could be as young as 14 or 15 years old. Uh, School windows. Let's talk about school windows for a little bit. So in these one-room schoolhouses, one wall is designated as all glass. And that is so because there's no artificial lighting. You have to rely on the sun and natural lighting. So the sun shines in. If there's one wall that's all glass, everybody gets the same amount of light. That's why desks are in rows. And if you think about it, even modern schools today have the same design. I mean, there's no need for that, but that's how it started from an agricultural one-room schoolroom point of view, and not much has changed since then. In Massachusetts, some of the bigger cities are starting to really take hold of the American Industrial Revolution. And it was mostly textiles and shoes. And these factories were Springfield, Massachusetts, which is about 100 miles west of Boston, became a big center for industry and factories. And a lot of people went there for jobs. It was a very dangerous place to work. No safety standards whatsoever. But Springfield had a great run for about 150 years or so. And if you go today, it's a dilapidated city with lots of crime and high unemployment. And they never really progressed any further than that American Industrial Revolution. They never really bounced back from not surviving from the downfall of that. The average lifespan was about 35 years old. If you made it past age 5, you might live to be 60 or 70. So the idealized romantic view of American farming Yankeedom in the 1800s was anything but romantic. Okay, so that's a little bit about our first poem, Old Oaken Bucket, by Samuel Woodworth. Okay, so for our final slide in today's presentation, we're going to talk about two songs involving the Civil War. And one is called The Battle Cry of Freedom, and the other song is called The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. So in our first song, which was a song for the North, The Battle Cry of Freedom, also known as Rally Round the Flag, is a song written in 1862 by American composer George Frederick Root during the American Civil War. A patriotic song advocating the causes of unionism and abolitionism. A modified Union version was used as the campaign song for the Abraham Lincoln Johnson ticket in 1864's presidential election, as well as in elections after the war. The song was so popular that the music publisher had 14 printing presses going at one time and still could not keep up with demand. It is estimated that over 700,000 copies of this song were put in circulation. Many thought it should be our national anthem. Now, for the South, I chose a modern song about the Civil War. And this is from an article from Modern Songs About the Civil War by Melissa Sator at ranker.com. And the song is The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, written by the band. The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, written by Robbie Robertson, was recorded by the band in 1969. The song went on to be covered by Joan Baez and Johnny Cash, among others. The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down tells the story of the final days of the Civil War from the perspective of a poor white Southerner, Virgil Caine. As the Union ravaged Virginia in 1865, Caine describes his struggle to survive, hungry and just barely alive. The song encapsulates the utter devastation felt by Southerners at the conflict's end. Caine is willing to accept his fate as a poor farmer, yet struggles to understand why his brother perished for the Confederate cause. So we can listen to both songs located in the description box below, The Battle Cry of Freedom and The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. So that's it for today's talk. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.